The rain slashed against the windows of the Malibu mansion like an omen, each drop a warning unheeded. Inside, crystal vases filled with roses caught the golden light, perfect and pristine, much like the life they were meant to adorn. But perfection is always an illusion. Some betrayals come like thunder, sudden and deafening. Others arrive in whispers, in forgotten iPads with messages never meant to be seen, in champagne flutes clinked by lovers plotting destruction, in the cold calculation of a man who sees his pregnant wife not as the mother of his child, but as an inconvenient obstacle. They say money can't buy happiness, but it can buy power. It can buy loyalty. It can buy the illusion that consequences are for lesser men. They never see it coming. These men who build empires on stolen dreams, they never imagine that the woman they discard might rise from the ashes, armed not with hatred, but with something far more dangerous. The truth. The California sun cast a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Malibu mansion, illuminating Lynn Dan as she carefully arranged roses in a crystal vase. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were deliberate, one hand often resting protectively on her swollen belly. The oceanfront property worth $30 million was just one of Alexander Stone's many possessions. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore below provided a soundtrack to what appeared to be a perfect life. Lynn Dan stepped back to admire her work, tucking a strand of sleek black hair behind her ear. At 34, she still possessed the elegant beauty that had first caught Alexander's attention 5 years ago. Born in Vietnam but raised in America, she had graduated from Harvard Law with honors before joining Harrison and Palmer, one of the most prestigious law firms in New York. It was during a high-stakes merger between Stone's company and a Japanese tech firm that they first met. Mrs. Stone, Maria, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Stone called. He won't be home for dinner again tonight. Emergency board meeting." Lynn Dan's smile faltered only briefly before she nodded. "Thank you, Maria. You can take the evening off." This would be the third emergency meeting this week. She glanced at her watch, a Patek Philippe that Alexander had given her for their third anniversary. It was already past 7. As Maria left, Lynn Dan slowly lowered herself onto the white leather sofa, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over her. Pregnancy had been harder than she expected, especially with Alexander increasingly absent. She had given up her thriving legal career to support his ambitions, to be the perfect wife to a man whose financial empire grew more demanding by the day. Stone Finex, Alexander's fintech company, had revolutionized digital banking and cryptocurrency trading. What had started as a promising startup had exploded into a global behemoth worth over $20 billion. The financial press called Alexander the king of digital finance, and his face regularly graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Bloomberg Businessweek. Lynn Dan reached for her phone, scrolling through their text messages. His responses had grown increasingly terse over the past few months. "Taking care of yourself," she had texted earlier. "Busy. Talk later," was his only reply. The baby kicked, and Lynn Dan smiled, rubbing her belly. "Your father is just busy, little one. He'll be so excited to meet you soon." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She heaved herself up from the sofa and wandered into Alexander's home office, a space she rarely entered. His iPad sat on the desk, forgotten in his morning rush. Alexander normally guarded his devices zealously, a habit he attributed to containing sensitive company information. A notification flashed across the screen. Without thinking, Lynn Dan tapped it, expecting a business alert. Instead, a message appeared. "Miss you already. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Love." And Lynn Dan stared at the message, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest, her hands trembling. She entered Alexander's password, their wedding date, though she half expected it wouldn't work. To her surprise, the iPad unlocked. What she found shattered her world. Hundreds of messages between Alexander and someone named Natasha, photos of a stunning blonde woman in various states of undress, hotel reservations, Private jet itineraries to Paris, Bali, and the Maldives trips Alexander had claimed were business-related. But it was the email thread dated just yesterday that truly devastated her. From Natasha Ivanova to Alexander Stone. Subject our future. Alex, darling, I've spoken with James. The divorce papers can be ready by next week. He assures me that with the prenup, she won't get much, especially if we move forward with our instability narrative. The timing actually works in our favor. Pregnancy hormones make women emotional, and we can use that against her. I can't wait to move into the Malibu house. I'm thinking of redecorating the master bedroom first, erasing all traces of her. Forever yours. N from Alexander Stone to Natasha Ivanova. Our future. It's all in motion. I've already moved most of our liquid assets to the Cayman accounts she doesn't know about. James is the best divorce attorney in California. She doesn't stand a chance, especially since she signed that updated prenup last year. The board already loves you as our new business development director. Once we're married, you'll be the perfect partner, both in business and life, everything she failed to be. We just need to be careful for a few more weeks. I'll handle everything after the quarterly investor meeting. Lindan felt the room spin. She clutched the edge of the desk, trying to steady herself as nausea swept through her body. Alexander was planning to leave her while she was pregnant with their child. Not only that, but he was actively plotting to paint her as unstable, to take everything from her, even their baby. The iPad slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the desk. She didn't hear the front door open, didn't notice Alexander's footsteps until he was standing in the doorway of his office, his imposing 6'2" frame suddenly menacing. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was ice cold. Lindan looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Who is Natasha?" she whispered. Alexander's expression changed in an instant from surprise to anger to calculated calm. He straightened his bespoke suit jacket, his handsome features arranging themselves into a mask of control. "You're going through my private communications now. This is exactly the kind of emotional, irrational behavior I've been concerned about." "Irrational?" Lindan's voice trembled. "I just found out my husband is having an affair and planning to divorce me while I'm carrying his child." Alexander stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "This isn't how I wanted to have this conversation, but since you've invaded my privacy, I suppose we should talk." "Talk? You've been—" Lindan's voice broke as another message notification appeared on the iPad. "You've been sleeping with this woman, planning a life with her, all while I've been here, building a nursery for our baby." "Lynn," Alexander said, his voice softening into the persuasive tone he used for difficult business negotiations. "You have to understand. Things between us haven't been right for a long time. You gave up your career. Yes, but you've contributed nothing to building StoneFinex. Natasha understands my vision, works tirelessly beside me. The connection we have—" "Stop!" Lindan held up her hand, suddenly feeling strangely calm. "Just stop. I don't want to hear about your connection with this woman. What I want to know is what you meant about instability and taking our baby." Alexander's eyes hardened. "Be reasonable, Lynn. You're in no condition to raise a child alone. Your emotional state has been concerning for months now. My lawyers feel, and I agree, that the child would be better off primarily with me." "Your lawyers, you've already discussed custody." The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. "It's just preliminary planning," Alexander said dismissively. "This isn't personal. It's about what makes sense." "Not personal," Lindan laughed incredulously, one hand protectively covering her belly. "You're trying to take my child. How is that not personal?" "This is exactly what I'm talking about." Alexander sighed, gesturing at her tears. "These emotional outbursts, it's not healthy." The doorbell rang, interrupting their confrontation. Alexander checked his watch, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "That would be Natasha," he said calmly. "You invited her here to our home." Lindan felt sick. "It's time you two met." This childish drama needs to end so we can all move forward like adults. Before Lynn Dan could respond, Alexander had left the office. She heard murmured greetings in the foyer, followed by a woman's melodic laugh. Forcing herself to her feet, Lynn Dan made her way to the living room. Natasha Ivanova was even more beautiful in person than in her photos. Tall and statuesque with platinum blonde hair cascading past her shoulders. She looked like she had stepped off a runway. At 29, she had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. She wore a red designer dress that accentuated every perfect curve, making Lynn Dan acutely aware of her own swollen body. "So this is the little wife," Natasha said, her Russian accent adding an exotic lilt to her words. Her eyes traveled dismissively over Lynn Dan's pregnant form. "Alex has told me so much about you." "Funny, he's told me nothing about you," Lynn Dan replied, struggling to maintain her composure. Alexander cleared his throat. "Lynn, Natasha is Stone Finex's new director of business development. And yes, we've become close. I've decided to accelerate our discussion about separation." "Acceleration? Is that what you call planning behind my back to divorce me and take my child?" Lynn Dan's voice rose. "I saw everything. Alexander, the emails about moving assets offshore, about painting me as unstable." "You shouldn't have looked at private correspondence," Alexander said coldly. "It only demonstrates your lack of boundaries." Natasha moved to Alexander's side, placing a manicured hand possessively on his arm. "Alex, darling, perhaps this conversation would be better with your lawyer present. She's clearly not in a rational state." "Don't you dare," Lynn Dan hissed. "Don't you dare speak about me as if I'm not standing right here." "Lynn, calm down," Alexander commanded. "This isn't good for the baby." "Don't pretend you care about this baby," Lynn Dan cried. "Your emails make it very clear your only interest is in how you can use our child to hurt me." Alexander exchanged a glance with Natasha. "See what I mean? These mood swings are exactly why I'm concerned about her ability to parent." The casual cruelty of his words hit Lynn Dan like a physical blow. This man who had once promised to love her forever, who had held her hand during their first ultrasound with tears in his eyes, was now coldly discussing taking their child away. "I want you both out of my house," she said quietly. Alexander laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Your house, I believe you'll find that nothing here belongs to you. Lynn, the prenuptial agreement you signed is quite clear on that point." "Then I'll leave," Lynn Dan said, turning toward the stairs. "Actually," Alexander said, his voice stopping her, "I've already arranged for you to move out. There's a furnished apartment in the city. All your personal items will be packed and sent there tomorrow." Lynn Dan turned back, stunned. "You're throwing me out tonight. I'm 7 months pregnant." "Alexander." "Don't be dramatic," he replied. "The apartment is perfectly adequate. My driver will take you there now." "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have." Alexander reached into his pocket and produced a black credit card. "This has a $10,000 limit. It should tide you over until the divorce is finalized. I've already instructed my accountants to freeze our joint accounts for everyone's protection." "Of course." Natasha watched the exchange with a small, satisfied smile playing on her red lips. "What about my things? My clothes? My—" "As I said, they'll be delivered tomorrow." Alexander's tone was final. "Robert is waiting outside with the car. I suggest you don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Lynn Dan stood frozen, unable to process the sudden collapse of her life. Just hours ago, she had been arranging flowers, waiting for her husband to come home. Now she was being discarded, replaced, her entire existence dismissed as inconvenient. "The baby could come early," she said, a last desperate appeal. "I need to be near my doctor, my hospital." "The apartment is 15 minutes from Cedars-Sinai," Alexander replied coolly. "All your medical expenses will continue to be covered. Of course, I'm not a monster, Lynn." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No, what would you call a man who throws his pregnant wife out of her home so his mistress can redecorate?" Anger flashed across Alexander's face. You have 30 minutes to collect whatever essentials you need tonight. Then Robert will drive you to the apartment. If you're not ready, security will escort you out. Security? You would have me physically removed, if necessary, Alexander confirmed, checking his watch. 29 minutes now. Lin Dan looked from Alexander to Natasha, searching for any sign of the man she had married, any hint of humanity or remorse. There was nothing, just cold determination in his steel-gray eyes. Without another word, she climbed the stairs to their bedroom. With shaking hands, she packed a small overnight bag, toiletries, a change of clothes, her prenatal vitamins. In the nursery, she gently touched the hand-painted mural of cherry blossoms she had commissioned, knowing she might never see it again. She took only one item, a small stuffed elephant she had bought the day they learned they were having a girl. When she returned downstairs, Alexander and Natasha were drinking champagne in the living room, their heads close together, laughing. They fell silent as she entered. "Your time is up anyway," Alexander said, not bothering to stand. "Robert is outside." Lin Dan straightened her shoulders, summoning the dignity that had once made her a formidable presence in courtrooms. "You will regret this, Alexander. Not because I will make you regret it, but because someday you'll realize what you threw away." Alexander's laugh was dismissive. "Always so dramatic. This is business. Lin, nothing personal." The rain had started falling by the time Robert opened the car door for her. The elderly driver's face was a mask of professional indifference, but his eyes held sympathy as he helped her into the back seat of the Bentley. "The apartment address is programmed in Mrs. Stone," he said quietly. "It should take about 40 minutes in this weather." As the car pulled away from the mansion, Lin Dan finally allowed herself to break down. Sobs racked her body as she clutched her small bag and the stuffed elephant. Through her tears, she watched the gates of her former home disappear into the rainy night. The apartment was exactly as Alexander had described, adequate. A sterile, furnished one-bedroom in a decent but unremarkable building. No ocean view, no security, nothing like the luxury she had become accustomed to. Robert carried her bag up and awkwardly patted her shoulder before leaving, alone in the unfamiliar space. Lin Dan sank onto the cheap sofa, her mind racing. Alexander had been planning this for months. The offshore accounts, the instability narrative, even this apartment, all arranged while she had been decorating a nursery and picking out baby names. A sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp. She breathed deeply, trying to calm herself. Stress wasn't good for the baby. Her baby. The child Alexander wanted to take from her. "No," she whispered fiercely. "That will never happen." The pain came again, stronger this time. Fumbling for her phone, she called her obstetrician's after-hours line. The on-call doctor advised her to go to the emergency room immediately. With no one to drive her, Lin Dan called a rideshare. The rain had intensified, turning the Los Angeles streets into gleaming rivers. By the time she reached Cedars-Sinai, her clothes were soaked and the contractions were coming regularly. Preterm labor, the ER doctor confirmed after examining her. Likely brought on by extreme stress. We need to stop it immediately. They administered medication to halt the contractions and monitored both her and the baby through the night. By morning, the immediate danger had passed, but the doctor was concerned. "Mrs. Stone, you need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks," he advised. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and there are signs of preeclampsia developing. Is there someone who can help care for you?" Lin Dan thought of her parents, both deceased, of friends she had gradually lost touch with as Alexander had isolated her, consumed by his need to control every aspect of their lives, of the few law school classmates she still occasionally texted, none close enough to ask for this kind of help. "I'll manage," she said quietly. The doctor frowned. "This is serious. Mrs. Stone, without proper rest and care, you risk early delivery, which could endanger both you and your baby." "I understand," she replied. "I'll hire a nurse." With the black credit card Alexander had given her, She arranged for a home health aide and a grocery delivery. Back at the apartment, she settled into bed, her mind clearer than it had been since discovering Alexander's betrayal. She had been a fool. She realized, blinded by love, she had given up her career, her independence, even signed that revised prenuptial agreement without having her own lawyer review it. Alexander had systematically isolated her, all while positioning Natasha to take her place. But Alexander had forgotten something crucial before she was his wife. Lynn Dan Nguyen had been one of the most promising young attorneys at Harrison and Palmer. She had specialized in corporate law, with a particular focus on financial fraud. Reaching for her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't thought about in years. Michael Parker. They had faced off in court during her last case before leaving the firm to marry Alexander. Michael had been representing the opposition brilliantly. She had to admit, he had lost the case, but earned her professional respect. She hesitated, her finger hovering over his number. It was barely 7 a.m. They hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years. He might not even remember her, but she needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid to go up against powerful men like Alexander, and Michael had that reputation. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pressed the call button. "Parker," a gruff voice answered on the fourth ring. "Michael, this is Lynn Dan Nguyen. Well, Stone now. We opposed each other in the Westridge merger case 5 years ago." There was a pause, then, "The Harvard hotshot who trounced me. Hard to forget. Word was you married the client." "Yes," she said, her voice faltering. "That's actually why I'm calling. I need a lawyer. Michael. A good one." Something in her tone must have conveyed her desperation, because his voice immediately became more serious. "What happened?" "Lynn Dan. My husband is trying to divorce me, take my child, and leave me with nothing. And he has James Windsor representing him." Michael whistled low. "Windsor is a shark, one of the best in L.A. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I need someone better." Another pause. "I don't do much divorce work these days. Mostly corporate cases, white-collar crime." "That's exactly why I need you," Lynn Dan said, sitting up straighter. "This isn't just about divorce. There's something not right about Alexander's finances. The way he's been moving assets offshore, the secrecy around certain accounts. I think there might be more to this than just hiding money from me." She could practically hear Michael's interest peaking. "Stone's company, Stone Finex. Right. They've been all over the financial news." "Yes, and I helped him build it. Michael, the core algorithm that made Stone Finex successful, that was my work, though you won't find my name anywhere in the patents." Michael's voice had taken on the analytical tone she remembered from the courtroom. "That could be useful, but Windsor will have a team of 20 lawyers backing him up." "I don't have much money," Lynn Dan admitted. "Alexander gave me a credit card with a $10,000 limit. That's all I have access to right now." "Jesus," Michael muttered. "He kicked you out. Last night, I'm 7 months pregnant and just spent the night in the ER because the stress triggered preterm labor." "That son of a bitch," Michael said with quiet intensity. "Look, I can't promise anything, but I'd like to hear more. Can you come to my office?" "The doctor ordered bed rest for 2 weeks," Lynn Dan explained. "Preeclampsia risk." "I'll come to you then," Michael decided. "Text me the address. I can be there around noon." "Thank you," Lynn Dan whispered, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Michael." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "Going up against Alexander Stone won't be easy, but if what you're suggesting about financial improprieties is true, well, that changes the game entirely." After hanging up, Lynn Dan felt the first stirrings of hope. Alexander thought he had all the power, that she would meekly accept whatever crumbs he offered. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Stone, a woman who had graduated at the top of her class, who had never backed down from a challenge. The home health aide arrived, a motherly Filipina woman named Rosa, who clucked disapprovingly at Lynn Dan's sparse accommodations and immediately set about making the apartment more comfortable. By the time Michael Parker arrived, Lynn Dan had managed to shower and change into a simple maternity dress, regaining some sense of dignity. Michael was much as she remembered, tall and broad-shouldered, with prematurely gray hair that somehow only enhanced his rugged good looks. At 45, he had the confident bearing of a man comfortable in his own skin. His eyes widened slightly at her pregnant state, but he quickly masked his surprise. "You look well, all things considered," he said, settling into the chair Rosa had positioned near the bed. "I look terrible," Lynn Dan contradicted with a small smile. "But thank you for the polite fiction." Michael grinned, and for a moment, they were back in that courtroom 5 years ago. Two worthy adversaries who respected each other's intelligence. "So," he said, pulling out a notepad, "tell me everything." For the next hour, Lynn Dan recounted her story meeting Alexander, their whirlwind romance, her contributions to his company, the gradual isolation from friends and family, and finally, the devastating discovery of his affair and plans to discard her. "I have copies of some of the emails," she said, reaching for her phone. "I forwarded them to myself before he took the iPad back." Michael reviewed them, his expression darkening. "This is pretty damning. He's not even trying to hide his intentions." "There's more," Lynn Dan said hesitantly. "When Alexander and I first developed Stone Finex, we worked with a young programmer named Jason Miller. He was brilliant, created much of the initial architecture for the trading platform. About a year in, Jason wanted formal recognition and a proper stake in the company. Alexander promised to take care of it. A week later, Jason died in a car accident." Michael's head snapped up. "Are you suggesting—" "I don't know," Lynn Dan admitted. "At the time, I was devastated. We all were. But looking back, Alexander changed after that, became more secretive, more controlling, and Stone Finex took off exponentially once Jason's code was fully implemented." "Was there an investigation into the accident?" "Yes, but it was ruled an accident. Single car crash on a rainy night, similar to tonight. No alcohol or drugs in his system, but the theory was that he fell asleep at the wheel." Michael made a note. "Any family?" "A younger sister, Emma. She was in college at the time. I lost touch with her after the funeral." "We should try to find her," Michael said. "If there's something suspicious about her brother's death, she might have looked into it." "There's one more thing," Lynn Dan added. "Jason kept meticulous records. He mentioned once that he had everything backed up to a secure server, all his original code, notes, communications. If those records still exist, they could be invaluable," Michael finished, "both for establishing your contribution to the company and potentially uncovering any wrongdoing." "Alexander doesn't know that I know as much as I do," Lynn Dan said. "He thinks I was just the supportive wife, clueless about the technical aspects of the business. But I was there from day one. Michael, I know where bodies are buried, figuratively speaking." Michael studied her, a new respect in his eyes. "You're not what I expected, Lynn Dan Stone." "I'm not what Alexander expected either," she replied with grim determination. "He thinks he's facing a heartbroken, desperate pregnant woman. He has no idea he's actually facing the woman who graduated first in her class at Harvard Law." A slow smile spread across Michael's face. "Now that's the Lynn Dan Nguyen I remember." He closed his notepad decisively. "I'm in. My retainer is normally 50,000, but we can worry about that after we've taken this bastard down." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Michael interrupted. "I'm offering. Besides, I've wanted a rematch with you for years. Working together will be much more satisfying than going up against you again." For the first time since discovering Alexander's betrayal, Lynn Dan felt a genuine smile for him. "Thank you, Michael. First things first," he said. "All business now. We need to secure your financial situation. That card could be canceled at any moment. Does Alexander know you've contacted me?" "No, not yet." "Good. Let's keep it that way for now. I'll file an emergency petition for temporary spousal support, citing your medical condition and pregnancy. That should get you some immediate funds. Alexander will fight it, Lindan warned. Let him, Michael said confidently. No judge is going to look kindly on a billionaire who threw his pregnant wife out in the rain. Meanwhile, I want to bring in a financial investigator I trust. If Alexander is hiding assets or engaged in any improprieties, Sarah will find them. What can I do? Lindan asked. I can't just sit here for 2 weeks doing nothing. You can focus on staying healthy and keeping that baby safe, Michael said firmly. And you can write down everything you remember about the development of Stone Finex dates, meetings, your contributions, Jason's involvement, everything. The more detailed, the better. Lindan nodded, already mentally compiling a timeline. I can do that. Good. Michael stood. I'll file the emergency petition today. Try not to worry. Alexander thinks he has all the advantages, but surprise is on our side. He has no idea what's coming. After Michael left, Lindan settled back against her pillows, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her renewed determination. It's just you and me for now, little one, she whispered. But we're not alone anymore. And your father is about to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Despite Lindan's confinement to bed rest, Michael's emergency petition was granted, forcing Alexander to provide $25,000 per month in temporary support. Alexander's lawyers, a team led by the formidable James Windsor, immediately filed a counter motion, claiming Lindan had violated the prenuptial agreement by abandoning the marital home and demonstrating emotional instability. Classic Windsor tactics, Michael explained during one of his daily visits. He's trying to establish a narrative early, but the judge wasn't buying it, especially after we submitted your medical records from the night Alexander kicked you out. Sarah Williams, the financial investigator Michael had brought in, was making progress unraveling Alexander's complex web of accounts. He's been moving money through a series of shell companies, Sarah explained, spreading documents across Lindan's bed. A former FBI forensic accountant, Sarah had the sharp eyes and methodical mind of someone who enjoyed untangling financial puzzles. Classic offshore structuring, but he's been sloppy in places. Too confident no one would look closely. What about Jason Miller? Lindan asked. Any luck finding his sister? That's our most interesting development, Michael said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Emma Miller works for Stone Finex. Lindan sat up straighter. What? Since when? She was hired about a year ago as a mid-level IT specialist. Kept her mother's maiden name Anderson, which is probably why no one made the connection. Or Alexander knew exactly who she was and wanted to keep her close. Lindan mused. The question is, does she know what happened to her brother? Only one way to find out, Michael replied. I've arranged to meet her tomorrow. Emma Miller, now Emma Anderson, agreed to meet Michael at a small coffee shop far from the Stone Finex offices. She was 28 now, with the same intense blue eyes and sharp features Lindan remembered from her brother. Her expression was guarded as Michael explained who he represented. Mrs. Stone, Emma said cautiously. I didn't think she'd remember Jason. She remembers a great deal, Michael replied, including your brother's contributions to Stone Finex and the suspicious timing of his death. Emma's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. What exactly are you suggesting? We're not suggesting anything yet, Michael said carefully. We're gathering information. Lindan believes your brother was instrumental in developing the core technology that made Stone Finex successful. Technology that Alexander Stone has claimed full credit for. Jason created everything, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. The entire trading algorithm was his design. Stone just provided the business framework and initial funding. Do you have proof of that? Emma hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop before leaning forward. Maybe. Jason was paranoid about intellectual property theft. He backed up everything: code, emails, meeting notes. He gave me access to his secure server before he died. Told me it was insurance. Have you looked at the files? Michael asked. Some of them. Enough to know that Alexander Stone stole my brother's work. Her eyes hardened. That's why I took the job at Stone Finex. I wanted to find evidence from the inside, proof that Jason's death wasn't an accident. And have you found anything? Nothing definitive about the accident, Emma admitted. But I found evidence of other irregularities, financial transactions that don't add up, customer accounts being manipulated, the kind of things that would interest the SEC. Michael passed her his card. Emma, we'd like your help. Whatever you can safely share with us could be crucial. Emma studied the card for a long moment. Jason liked Lynn Dan, said she was the only one who truly understood his vision for the platform. She slipped the card into her pocket. I'll be in touch, but you should know I'm not the only one investigating Alexander Stone. There have been others asking questions. What others? Michael pressed. I don't know exactly, but someone accessed some of the same financial records I've been looking at. Someone with high-level clearance. She stood, adjusting her bag. I have to get back to work. I'll contact you when I can. By the time Lynn Dan's 2 weeks of bed rest ended, they had amassed a substantial file on Alexander's activities. Sarah had traced millions flowing through offshore accounts. Emma had provided access to Jason's secure server, revealing damning emails where Alexander discussed taking sole credit for Jason's work. But it was a discovery in Lynn Dan's own records that provided the most explosive evidence. While organizing old documents, she found a flash drive she had forgotten about, one containing the original partnership agreement for Stone Finex, signed by Alexander, Lynn Dan, and Jason. The agreement, never formally filed, granted Lynn Dan 40% ownership and Jason 25%. This changes everything, Michael said, reviewing the document. This predates your marriage and the prenup. It establishes you as a founding partner, not just a spouse. Alexander will claim it was superseded by later agreements, Lynn Dan pointed out. Let him try, Michael replied with a predatory smile. We now have evidence that he deliberately concealed your ownership stake, which constitutes fraud. Combined with the financial irregularities Sarah found in Jason's records, we're not just fighting a divorce case anymore. Lynn Dan, we're looking at potential criminal charges. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Alexander's PR machine had gone into overdrive. Stories began appearing in business publications about Natasha Ivanova, the brilliant strategist behind Stone Finex's recent growth. Photos of Alexander and Natasha at charity galas and business events flooded social media. In one particularly calculated move, they gave a joint interview to Forbes, discussing their vision for the future of finance, while Alexander obliquely referenced his unfortunate domestic situation and his hopes for an amicable resolution. Lynn Dan, meanwhile, maintained complete silence. On Michael's advice, she refused all interview requests and stayed away from social media. She focused on preparing for the hearing and, more importantly, keeping herself and her baby healthy. The night before the hearing, Alexander made his first direct contact since throwing her out. A text message appeared on her phone. My lawyers tell me you've hired Michael Parker. An interesting choice. I'm willing to be generous. Lynn, $5 million settlement, joint custody with primary residence with me, one-time offer. Consider it carefully. Lynn Dan stared at the message, anger and disbelief warring within her. After everything he had done, Alexander still believed he could dictate terms, still thought she would accept his crumbs out of fear or desperation. I'll see you in court, she replied simply. The Los Angeles County Superior Court was crowded with reporters when Lynn Dan arrived the next morning. Now 8 months pregnant, she wore a simple but elegant navy maternity dress, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Michael walked beside her, carrying a briefcase filled with the evidence they had gathered. Inside the courtroom, Alexander was already seated at the respondent's table, flanked by James Windsor and 2 junior attorneys. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, his dark hair styled impeccably, looking every bit the successful businessman. Natasha sat directly behind him in the gallery, dressed in a conservative black dress that still managed to highlight her model-like figure. Alexander's eyes widened slightly when he saw Lynn Dan, taking in her composed demeanor and the protective way she rested one hand on her belly. He had expected her to appear broken, desperate. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a veteran family court judge known for her no-nonsense approach, called the hearing to order. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Buff Stone. I understand there are motions regarding temporary support and custody arrangements pending. James Windsor rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We're seeking expedited resolution on several key issues, including Mrs. Stone's concerning pattern of emotional instability, which bears directly on future custody arrangements. Michael stood. Your Honor, before Mr. Windsor continues his character assassination of my client, we'd like to present evidence that fundamentally alters the nature of these proceedings. Proceed, Mr. Parker, Judge Harmon said, peering over her reading glasses. Your Honor, this case is not merely about divorce and custody. It involves substantial financial fraud, intellectual property theft, and potentially more serious matters that may warrant criminal investigation. Windsor jumped to his feet. Objection. These outrageous allegations are completely outside the scope of today's hearing. I'll determine what's within scope. Mr. Windsor, Judge Harmon said firmly. Continue, Mr. Parker. Michael approached the bench, presenting the original partnership agreement. Your Honor, this document establishes that my client is not merely Mr. Stone's wife, but a founding partner of Stone Finex, with a 40% ownership stake that predates their marriage and any prenuptial agreement. The judge examined the document carefully while Alexander whispered urgently to Windsor. Furthermore, Michael continued, we have evidence that Mr. Stone has been systematically hiding assets through offshore accounts, manipulating financial records, and engaging in potentially illegal trading practices. He presented Sarah Williams's detailed financial analysis, along with selected documents from Jason Miller's secure server. Most disturbing, Michael concluded, is evidence suggesting that Mr. Stone may have stolen the core technology that made Stone Finex successful from a programmer named Jason Miller, who died under suspicious circumstances shortly after requesting formal recognition of his contributions. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Judge Harmon reviewed the documents with growing concern, occasionally glancing up at Alexander, whose face had lost its confident expression. Mr. Windsor, the judge finally said, these allegations and supporting documentation are extremely serious. Do you wish to respond? Windsor stood, visibly rattled, but attempting to maintain his composure. Your Honor, these wild accusations are clearly a desperate attempt by Mrs. Stone to extract a more favorable settlement. The supposed partnership agreement was never formally filed and was superseded by later corporate documents. As for these financial allegations, they're based on incomplete information taken out of context by individuals with no expertise in the complex world of international finance. One of those individuals is a former FBI forensic accountant, Michael countered. And we have much more evidence than what we've presented today. Judge Harmon held up her hand. I've seen enough to know that this case requires more thorough examination than a simple divorce proceeding. Mr. Parker, are you planning to submit these materials to the SEC and other relevant authorities? Yes, Your Honor. We're prepared to file formal complaints with the SEC, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the District Attorney's Office. Alexander suddenly stood. Your Honor, may I address the court? Mr. Stone, you're represented by counsel. You should speak through your attorney, Judge Harmon advised. I understand, but I believe I can resolve this matter quickly. Alexander straightened his tie, attempting to regain control of the situation. These allegations are clearly the result of a misunderstanding. I'm willing to offer Mrs. Stone a more generous settlement, $20 million, and full joint custody to resolve all matters amicably. Lynn Dan felt a surge of triumph. Alexander was scared. For the first time, he was on the defensive. Mr. Stone, Judge Harmon said sternly. You appear to be missing the point. If even half of what Mr. Parker has presented is accurate, we're looking at potential federal crimes, not just a divorce settlement. Your Honor, Michael interjected, we have one more witness who may shed light on these matters. He gestured toward the back of the courtroom where Emma Anderson sat quietly. Ms. Anderson works for Stone Finex and has direct knowledge of some of the financial irregularities we've identified. She's also the sister of Jason Miller, the programmer whose work Mr. Stone allegedly appropriated. A visible ripple of shock passed through Alexander's body as he turned to look at Emma. His face paled further as recognition dawned. Your Honor, I request a brief recess to confer with my client, Windsor said urgently. Granted, 20 minutes, Judge Harmon declared, banging her gavel. As Alexander and his legal team huddled in intense conversation, Lynn Dan turned to Michael. He's rattled. I've never seen him lose control like this. Good, Michael said grimly. He should be scared. Sarah's already been in touch with her contacts at the SEC. Once they see what we have... Across the courtroom, Alexander kept glancing at Emma, who met his gaze with cold determination. Natasha had disappeared, noticeably absent when the court reconvened 20 minutes later. Windsor approached the bench. Your Honor, my client would like to propose a settlement conference to resolve all matters privately. I imagine he would, Judge Harmon replied dryly. However, given the nature of the allegations, I'm concerned about potential destruction of evidence or flight risk. She turned to Alexander. Mr. Stone, surrender your passport to the court clerk. I'm also issuing an order freezing all assets of Stone Finex pending further investigation. Alexander's face contorted with fury. You can't do that. The company employs thousands of people. This will cause a market panic. You should have considered that before engaging in questionable financial practices. Mr. Stone, the judge replied coldly. This hearing is adjourned until next week. In the meantime, I'm forwarding these materials to the appropriate authorities. As the courtroom emptied, Alexander approached Lynn Dan, ignoring Michael's protective stance beside her. What do you want? He hissed, his handsome face ugly with rage. Name your price. Lynn Dan regarded him calmly, one hand resting on her belly. There was a time when all I wanted was your love and respect. Alexander, now I want justice for myself, for our child, and for Jason Miller. You'll regret this, he threatened. When Stone Finex collapses, you'll get nothing. I don't want your money, Lynn Dan replied. I want the truth to come out, and it will, one way or another. Windsor pulled Alexander away before he could respond further, but his venomous glare followed Lynn Dan as she left the courtroom, head held high. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Michael fielded them with practiced ease. We're confident in our evidence. Mrs. Stone's primary concern is the well-being of her child and seeing justice done. No further comments at this time. In the car, Lynn Dan finally allowed herself to relax, the tension of the day catching up with her. He's not going to give up easily. Michael, Alexander hates losing more than anything. Let him fight, Michael said confidently. We have the truth on our side, and a mountain of evidence. The SEC will be all over Stone Finex by tomorrow. What about Natasha? She disappeared during the recess. Sarah's tracking her movements. If she tries to run with any of Alexander's assets, we'll know. The next morning, the financial news was dominated by reports of the Stone Finex investigation. The company's stock plummeted 30% within hours of market opening. Business channels featured experts discussing the potential impact on the broader fintech sector. Alexander issued a statement denying all allegations and assuring investors that operations would continue normally. But the damage was done. By afternoon, the SEC had announced a formal investigation. Trading in Stone Finex shares was temporarily suspended. Several major clients publicly announced they were withdrawing their assets from the platform. Lynn Dan watched it all unfold from the safety of her apartment, fielding calls from Michael and Sarah with regular updates. Emma had provided additional internal documents, including evidence that Alexander had been manipulating certain high-value customer accounts, essentially using client funds to cover his own trading losses. 3 days after the hearing, as Lynn Dan was preparing for bed, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Mrs. Stone. This is Detective Rivera with the LAPD. We've arrested your husband." Lynn Dan sank onto the edge of her bed. "Arrested? On what charges?" "Financial fraud for now, but we're also reopening the investigation into Jason Miller's death. Some new evidence has come to light suggesting his car accident might not have been accidental." After hanging up, Lynn Dan sat in stunned silence. It was happening faster than she had anticipated. Alexander, the man who had seemed untouchable, who had discarded her so carelessly, was now in police custody. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Just heard." "You okay?" "Yes," she replied. "Just processing. This is just the beginning." Michael texted back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another big day." As if on cue, the baby kicked vigorously, as if reminding Lynn Dan of the future she was fighting for. She placed both hands on her belly, a mixture of emotions washing over her vindication. Sadness for what might have been, but mostly a profound sense of peace. Alexander had tried to paint her as emotionally unstable, as incapable of caring for their child. Instead, he had awakened the fighter in her, the brilliant legal mind that had once made her a rising star. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "Better than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." The next morning brought news that Natasha had been detained at LAX, attempting to board a flight to Moscow with forged travel documents and nearly $1 million in cash. Financial investigators had frozen dozens of offshore accounts linked to Alexander and Stone Phoenix. The company's board of directors issued a statement announcing Alexander's immediate removal as CEO and the appointment of an interim management team. In the days that followed, more damning evidence emerged. Former employees came forward with stories of Alexander's unethical business practices. Financial journalists uncovered links between Stone Phoenix and various money laundering operations. Emma Miller publicly revealed her identity as Jason's sister and shared her brother's story with selected media outlets. When Lynn Dan went into labor 2 weeks later, it was Michael who drove her to the hospital, who paced nervously in the waiting room, and who was the first person besides the medical staff to hold little Mayanne Stone after her birth. "She's perfect," Michael said softly, cradling the newborn with surprising tenderness. "She has your eyes, and hopefully my temperament rather than her father's," Lynn Dan replied with a tired smile. Alexander remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk. The criminal investigations had expanded to include charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The reopened investigation into Jason Miller's death was ongoing, with forensic experts re-examining the crashed vehicle and financial transactions surrounding the time of his death. 6 months after Mayanne's birth, Lynn Dan sat in another courtroom, this time for Alexander's criminal trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Jason's secure server had yielded emails where Alexander explicitly discussed taking care of the Jason problem shortly before the programmer's fatal accident. Financial records revealed a payment of $500,000 to an offshore account linked to a known fixer with ties to organized crime. Alexander's defense strategy, blaming subordinates and claiming ignorance of the details, fell apart under cross-examination. Former colleagues testified to his obsessive control over every aspect of Stone Phoenix's operations. Internal emails showed his direct involvement in the fraudulent activities. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Alexander finally looked broken. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and graced magazine covers now sat slumped at the defense table, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame after months in detention. The judge's sentence was severe: 15 years for the financial crimes, with additional charges related to Jason's death still pending. As Alexander was led away in handcuffs, he caught Lynn Dan's eye across the courtroom. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face before he disappeared through the door to begin his new life as a convicted felon. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Lynn Dan, Michael at her side. "Mrs. Stone, how do you feel about the verdict?" Lynn Dan adjusted Mayanne in her arms, the baby now a chubby 6-month-old with curious eyes. Justice has been served, not just for me, but for everyone hurt by Alexander's actions, the investors he defrauded, the employees he betrayed, and especially Jason Miller and his family. "What's next for you?" another reporter called out. Lynn Dan exchanged a glance with Michael, whose hand rested supportively at the small of her back. "The board of Stone Finex has asked me to join the restructured company as chief legal officer. I've accepted, on the condition that Emma Miller be named chief technology officer. Together, we plan to rebuild the company on a foundation of transparency and ethical practice." "And your relationship with Michael Parker," a tabloid reporter shouted. "Are the rumors true?" Michael stepped forward, his expression stern. "Mrs. Stone has demonstrated extraordinary courage and resilience throughout this ordeal. Our professional relationship continues to be based on mutual respect and admiration." Lynn Dan couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Their professional relationship had indeed evolved into something deeper over the months of working closely together, though they had been careful to keep it private until the legal proceedings concluded. "One last question," a financial reporter called. "The settlement grants you majority ownership of what remains of Stone Finex. The company has lost billions in value. Do you believe it can be saved?" "Stone Finex was built on brilliant technology that was unethically acquired," Lynn Dan replied. "With the right leadership and proper ethical foundations, I believe it can be transformed into something valuable, not just financially, but as a model for how companies should operate." As they made their way through the crowd to the waiting car, Michael leaned close. "You were magnificent in there." "We all were," Lynn Dan replied, smiling at Emma, who walked on her other side. "Team effort." Emma nodded, her expression finally free of the shadow that had haunted her since her brother's death. Jason would be proud, especially of what comes next. The next they had planned was already taking shape. While Alexander began his prison sentence, Stone Finex was being rebuilt from the ground up. The core technology now properly credited to Jason Miller remained, but the business model was being completely overhauled. Lynn Dan split her time between the company's offices and her new home, a modest but comfortable house near the beach, where Mai-On could grow up away from the excesses that had corrupted her father. Michael had become a constant presence in their lives, his initial professional admiration for Lynn Dan having blossomed into something much deeper. One evening, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset while Mai-On slept peacefully inside, Michael broached a subject they had carefully avoided. "Have you read Alexander's letter?" he asked quietly. Lynn Dan sighed. Alexander had written to her from prison several times, the letters becoming increasingly desperate as the reality of his situation sank in. His latest message had arrived that morning. "Not yet," she admitted. "Part of me doesn't want to hear anything he has to say." "That's understandable," Michael said, taking her hand. "But maybe there's something to be gained from closure." Lynn Dan leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "You're right. I'll read it tomorrow." When she finally opened the letter the next day, she found a rambling confession Alexander admitting to his crimes, expressing regret not for his actions but for being caught. He wrote of missing the luxuries of his former life, of the indignities of prison. Only in the final paragraph did he mention Mai-On, asking for photos and suggesting that, once she was older, she might visit him. Lynn Dan folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box where she kept the documentation of her journey from the night Alexander had thrown her out to the final verdict in his trial. Someday, when Mai-On was old enough, she would share these with her daughter, not to foster resentment against her father, but to teach her about resilience, justice, and the importance of standing up for oneself. For now, though, Lynn Dan was focused on the future. Stone Finex, under its new leadership, was slowly regaining trust in the marketplace. Emma had implemented safeguards to prevent the kind of manipulation Alexander had engaged in. The company had established a foundation in Jason's name to support young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds. And on a personal level, Lindan had found a balance she had never known with Alexander. Her relationship with Michael progressed naturally, without the whirlwind intensity that had characterized her courtship with Alexander. They were partners in the truest sense, equals who respected each other's strengths and supported each other through challenges. 1 year to the day after Alexander's conviction, Michael proposed not with an ostentatious diamond like Alexander had, but with a simple sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "It doesn't have to be now, or even soon," he said as they walked along the beach. Mayan toddling between them, holding their hands. "But I want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul. You and Mayan, you're my family now." Lindan looked at this man who had stood beside her through the darkest period of her life, who had believed in her when she had barely believed in herself. At Mayan, who was growing into a joyful, curious child untainted by her father's sins. At the life they were building together, not perfect, but real and honest. "Yes," she said simply, watching the sun sink into the Pacific. "We're ready." As they walked back to their home, so different from the cold mansion she had once shared with Alexander Lin, Dan reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Alexander had thought he was discarding her, removing an inconvenient obstacle to his desires. Instead, he had set her free to reclaim her strength, her purpose, and ultimately, to build a life of authentic happiness. Justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in the quiet victory of living well, the most powerful revenge of all.